Minister, Mr. Peter Bunting, Commissioner Owen Ellington, Permanent Secretary, Dr. Anne-Marie Barnes, officials of the Jamaica Constabulary, and I see a representative from the Jamaica Defence Force, welcome. Good morning all. We are here today for another what is momentous in the life of the JCF, vehicles. Without vehicles, we can't function. And so we are ever grateful to our parent ministry for, in the words of Permanent Secretary, moving heaven and earth to let us get these vehicles today. At this point, I'd like to invite Commissioner Ellington to the podium.
Much, Mrs. Patterson, for that text for my few remarks. Honorable Minister, Permanent Secretary, Commander representing the JDF, Deputy Commissioner Hines, senior officers, men and women, and our friends from the media, good morning. It's indeed my pleasure to be here at this ceremony, brief ceremony, where the Honorable Minister and PS will hand over to the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the first in a batch of new vehicles being acquired for the force at this time. The Director of Corporate Services actually suggested the things that I should speak about, specifically in terms of what this means to the Jamaica Constabulary Force. We all understand that a large, complex organization such as ours, with the very broad span of responsibility that we have servicing an entire country, cannot be effective without some very critical capabilities. And key among these is what we call force mobility. Many persons tend to take a very narrow view on force mobility, believing that it is only vehicles that give you mobility. But I want to assure all, especially Minister, because I know the concerns you have about how vehicles are cared for and how they are used. And our understanding of force mobility is that it is the composite of the vehicles, training infrastructure, basing and maintenance infrastructure, and discipline and standard operating procedures, and a command and control system that ensures that the equipment are used for the sole purpose of delivering police service to the citizens that we serve. And though most people may not see all the components of this capability, most people will see the vehicles being used on the road. And I think for those of us who will operate these vehicles, you have an obligation to demonstrate to the government and to the taxpayers of this country that you appreciate the investments made in acquiring these vehicles, that you appreciate that they had value to the work that you do, and that you will demonstrate it by the careful handling, safe use, and the way in which you care for these vehicles. Our effectiveness can be seriously compromised if we are experiencing any serious gap in force mobility. Time and time again, we have found ourselves in a situation where we need to perform our functions, but we are inhibited in a way because our mobility has been seriously undermined. What we are seeing here is an effort being made by the government in building back force mobility to the level that it is desired. I would like to appeal to all the members of the JCF to play your part in ensuring that the investment made is a worthwhile one, that it is one which will contribute in the long run to improvement in the JCF service. And I think you can do this by caring for the vehicles, operating them safely, being very, very careful when you operate on the roads, use them for police service only. And one of the things that we plan to do, Minister, is to use our communication system through police control, just as we do with issues surrounding officer safety and use of force, just to constantly remind the men and women when they are operating vehicles on the road, the safe driving practice, remaining within the speed limit, to resist any temptation to engage in high-speed chase, and to ensure that the vehicles are pulled out of service when required for maintenance, preventive maintenance and servicing. So I want to give the assurance that we will use these to the best of our abilities, ensure that they are maintained and kept and preserved so they can be with us for a long, long time, and at the same time to say to our general public that you can expect to see improved quality of service and responsiveness because of the fact that we are seeing significant infusion of vehicles into our mobile capability. So thanks to everyone, and Honourable Minister, I think a few remarks from you are timely. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Patterson, Commissioner, um, other members of the High Command, Captain Innes, ladies and gentlemen. I am particularly pleased to be able to be participating in this ceremony this morning for more than one reason. First of all, because given the additional stresses put on the JCF and the JDF in responding to Hurricane Sandy, it's really timely that we have these additional vehicles here to increase mobility. And in fact, even though they all look shiny and clean this morning, many of them were deployed from Tuesday in order to increase the presence and visibility on the road both before, during, and after the hurricane. But I'm particularly pleased to be handing over the first in a batch of 75 motor vehicles purchased for the JCF this month, because literally from day one the Commissioner has been making this point to me about forced mobility. And I feel very frustrated when you go month after month after month and you're hearing of the need. I see it when I go out in the field. In fact, sometimes I am embarrassed for some of the men and women still driving vehicles, sometimes 15 years old, that can barely move off on a slope with 3 or 4 hefty policemen in the vehicle. And I'm talking hefty in a good way, muscular, not hefty in the overweight way, hefty in a good way. So I faced with a particularly difficult challenge. Everyone knows that this budget was an austerity budget. You know, we're negotiating an IMF program which is really going to see the resources, particularly capital resources of government, under severe constraint. So I am really happy that we were able to get this first commitment of 250 million in expenditure this month, and we are expecting another 250 million before the end of the fiscal year. And we had to be very creative in doing this, because this expenditure, although still not what we would have liked, it represents the largest injection of resources in terms of the capital budget for vehicles over the last 3 years. In fact, by the end of this fiscal year, we will have spent more in this year on acquiring vehicles than was spent cumulatively over the previous 3 years. So I am really pleased to be able to say that in this case, it is one of the finest demonstrations of joined up government, because after being frustrated in going down to the Ministry of Finance and speaking with Minister Phillips, what we were able to do is to get some help from finance, but also from tourism through the TEF, and from the Ministry of Science, Technology, Energy and Mining, who agreed to reallocate some of the funds previously allocated in the budget to their ministry to facilitate our acquiring these vehicles. And that is really appreciated, and I think coming behind the allocation of 10 of the buses originally ordered for JUTC, what I want to acknowledge is the selflessness of the colleague ministers and the ministries in reallocating some of their resources to the Ministry of National Security, primarily the police, but also the JDF hasn't been left out entirely, and even the Department of Corrections is getting a little touch. But as important as acquiring new vehicles is the care and maintenance of them. And Mrs. Pattison can vouch that I have taken a great personal interest. Both Mrs. Pattison and Mr. Dietrich can can vouch that I've taken a great personal interest in the fleet management, and we have over the last few months been working on a strategic fleet procurement and maintenance policy jointly with the JDF, and looking at how to rationalize the wide variety of vehicles in terms of makes and models, over 100 models, and how to rationalize that to really make the work of TNR a little simpler in terms of stocking spare parts, tools, etc. I think we've made tremendous headway in that regard in streamlining, and I know Mr. Dietrich is a lot happier now than he was a few months ago when we started this process. And he is not just happy, but he's turning out the vehicles, turning over 37 to 40 per day, you say now, which is a substantial improvement on what was happening previously. I want to also especially thank the public officials who, you know, they are the masters in using the system. The policymakers are not. And I want to especially recognize my permanent secretary, Dr. Barnes, who really maneuvered, I don't want to say manipulated, who maneuvered within the system to find every spare dollar lying around, not just within the ministry, but within our agencies and in other ministries. And she has worked very closely with Mrs. Loris Jarrett and Mr. Morrison from the Ministry of Finance, and also Ms. Wittig from the Ministry of National Security. So we're going to be handing over 75 vehicles this month, but that's not the end. In November, we also expect to receive an additional 15 cars, and particularly for Senior Superintendent Radcliffe Lewis, 44 motorcycles, which I know he is going to use flamboyantly in ensuring order on the roads when those get here by the end of November. And that will not just enhance mobility, but allow for more effective patrols in communities, and also sometimes even in terms of response. Bikes can respond much quicker, particularly within the built-up areas, than even the vehicles due to traffic. So just in closing, I look forward to the GSCF making very good use of these vehicles, not just in this particular time, but going forward into next year as we improve the safety and security of the people of Jamaica. And I, in closing, want to here acknowledge the tremendous effort that the men and women of the GSCF and the ISCF, and indeed the JDF, have been putting out over the last 96 hours or so, patrolling almost non-stop in an environment where their own lives would have been at risk in the teeth of the hurricane, and ensuring that loss of life, damage to property, and all the risks of a disaster like the one we've experienced this week were minimized. And I really want to say thank you on behalf of a grateful nation to all our first responders, but in particular those who fall under the Ministry of National Security and who have been doing an extraordinary job this past week. Thank you very much.
We are now going to have the symbolic handing over. We will have Minister hand over a key or two to Commissioner.